Spring morning sunlight filtered through cherry blossoms along the Anderson estate driveway. Dr. Michael Grant, now a sanitation worker, stopped his green truck before the iron gates. He waved toward the mansion window, where 7-year-old Emma Anderson watched, as she did every morning. Michael stepped down to collect the bins. His keychain slipped from his pocket, the smiley face charm glinting on stone. Emma moved before thinking. She crossed the threshold, bent down, picked up the charm. Michael turned, surprised. "Thank you, Princess." Emma's lips trembled. Her voice, silent for 3 years, emerged as barely a whisper. "Mr." Eleanor Anderson stepped onto the porch at that exact moment. She froze. Her daughter had spoken. As Michael drove away, Eleanor whispered, "Find out who that man is." Eleanor Anderson's world existed behind walls most people would never breach. At 32, she commanded boardrooms with surgical precision. Her company, Anderson Global Solutions, employed over 5,000 people across 3 continents. Magazines called her a visionary, but none mentioned the silence filling her mansion, the kind of quiet that pressed against walls and made breathing feel intrusive. The estate sprawled across 6 acres north of New York City. 15 bedrooms, mostly untouched. A library with unread books. A grand piano nobody played. 3 years ago, laughter had filled these rooms. Her husband James had brought life to every space. Emma, just 4 then, had chattered endlessly about princesses and clouds. Then came the accident. A rainy November evening. Slick roads. A truck that didn't stop. James died instantly. Emma, strapped in her car seat, survived without physical injury, but something inside her broke. She stopped speaking the day of the funeral. Doctors called it selective mutism triggered by psychological trauma. Eleanor tried everything. Speech therapists with puppets. Child psychologists discussing grief. Medications that made Emma drowsy but brought no words. 18 specialists across 3 years, not one syllable. Every morning, Eleanor watched her daughter sit by the window. Emma pressed her small hand against glass when the green garbage truck appeared, following its movement with intensity. For those few moments, Emma's face softened, almost a smile. The only time Eleanor saw life in her daughter's eyes. 5 miles away, Michael Grant's day began before dawn. His cottage had peeling blue paint and a sagging porch. Inside, warmth radiated from every corner. Photographs covered the refrigerator. A beat-up guitar leaned against the wall. This was a house where people actually lived. Michael moved quietly through the kitchen, brewing coffee and packing lunches. At 36, his face carried lines of hard-earned wisdom. Upstairs, 8-year-old Noah still slept, sprawled across his bed. Michael smiled. That boy was his entire world. 9 years ago, Michael had been someone else entirely. Dr. Michael Grant, rising star in child behavioral psychology at Columbia University, published researcher, sought-after lecturer, the prodigy who'd earned his doctorate at 25. Then came one night that changed everything. A conference in Boston. Too many drinks. A woman whose name he barely remembered. When she appeared at his office 8 months later, visibly pregnant, he'd assumed she wanted to discuss options. Instead, she left a note 3 weeks after giving birth. "His name is Noah. He's yours. I can't do this." Michael's reputation crumbled overnight. The university asked for his resignation. Colleagues suddenly had no time for calls. Research grants evaporated. His parents cut contact when he refused to give Noah up for adoption, so Michael made a choice. He walked away from everything he'd built, found honest work that paid bills, and left his mind free to focus on being a father. For 8 years now, he'd collected garbage without shame. Every morning as he started his route, Michael whistled the same soft melody. He didn't know that 5 miles away, a little girl who couldn't speak listened for that sound through her window. Eleanor stood in her home office, fingers trembling as she rewound security footage for the 7th time. The timestamp read 6:47 in the morning. On screen, Emma walked across the stone path. The sanitation worker turned. His smile was gentle. His lips moved. "Thank you, Princess." Then Emma's face tilted upward. Her mouth opened. And there it was. Small. Fragile. Unmistakable. "Mr." Eleanor pressed her palm against her lips. Her daughter's voice. After 3 years of silence, after 18 specialists and countless treatments, the garbage truck pulled away. She paused the video and reached for her phone. Within an hour, she had a name. Michael Grant. Age 36. Employed by Westchester Sanitation Services for 8 years. Widowed, 1 son. Previous address near Columbia University. Eleanor's hands went cold. She typed his name into the university database. The file that appeared made her breath catch. Dr. Michael Grant, Ph.D. in Child Behavioral Psychology, former associate professor, specialist in selective mutism and trauma-induced speech disorders, published author of 14 peer-reviewed papers. Eleanor sat back, mind racing. She'd attended Columbia herself. She remembered hearing about a young professor revolutionizing child psychology. A genius, people called him. Then he'd vanished from academic circles, and now he was collecting her garbage. Now he was the reason her daughter had spoken for the first time in 3 years. The next morning, Eleanor stood at her driveway's end before dawn. When the green truck appeared, she stepped directly into its path. Michael braked smoothly. Eleanor spoke before she could second-guess herself. "What did you do to make my daughter speak?" Michael studied the woman before him. Even in early morning shadows, Eleanor Anderson radiated control, but her hands, clasped tightly together, betrayed her desperation. He'd seen that look before, in faces of parents who brought silent children to his office. He turned off the engine and climbed down, moving slowly. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, gentle. "I didn't do anything, Mrs. Anderson. I just listened." Eleanor's composure cracked. Her mask slipped just enough for Michael to see the exhaustion underneath. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "My daughter hasn't spoken in 3 years. 3 years of doctors and therapists and medications. Then you smile at her, and she says a word. So I'll ask again. What did you do?" Michael leaned against the truck. Spring morning birds sang around them. "Children like Emma don't need to be fixed, Mrs. Anderson. They need to be heard. There's a difference." Eleanor felt something inside her chest twist painfully. When was the last time she'd really listened to Emma? Not monitored therapy sessions or tracked progress. Actually listened. Actually been present in a way that wasn't about solving a problem. Michael's eyes held no judgment. Only understanding. She wrapped her arms around herself. "I've tried everything. Every specialist. Every treatment. I don't know what else to do." Michael nodded slowly. He remembered this helplessness. Maybe that's the problem. You've been trying to fix her. But Emma isn't broken. She's just afraid of a world that hurt her. And fear doesn't respond to treatment plans. It responds to safety. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. This stranger had just articulated something she'd been unable to face for 3 years. "If you want my help, I'm willing. But not as a therapist. Not for money. Just as someone who understands what it's like when the world stops making sense." Eleanor nodded. Michael climbed back into his truck, leaving Eleanor standing in her driveway as dawn broke. She pulled out her phone and typed a message. "Would you come to the house? Tomorrow? Please." Michael showed up at the Anderson estate the following Saturday morning, in a dented Honda with Noah beside him. Eleanor had offered him money, professional fees, whatever he needed. Michael had refused payment. "If it helps Emma, I'm willing to try. But I'm not a therapist anymore, Mrs. Anderson." Now, standing in the grand foyer, Michael felt the weight of wealth and silence pressing down. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, original artwork on walls that stretched upward forever. Noah pressed closer to his father's side. This wasn't a home, it was a museum. Eleanor appeared at the top of the curved staircase, Emma's small hand held firmly in hers. The little girl's eyes widened when she saw Michael. Not fear, recognition. Something that looked almost like relief. Michael knelt down slowly, bringing himself to Emma's eye level. He didn't smile too widely or speak too cheerfully. He simply existed in her space, patient and unhurried. "Hello, Emma. My name is Michael. This is my son, Noah." Noah offered a small wave. Emma's gaze shifted to the boy, curiosity flickering across her face. Eleanor watched from the stairs, her heart hammering. This felt wrong somehow. Too informal. Where was the treatment plan? The structured intervention? Michael stood and turned to Eleanor. "Can we go outside? The garden, maybe?" Eleanor hesitated. Every therapist she'd hired had worked indoors, but something in Michael's calm certainty made her nod. She led them to the back terrace overlooking an elaborate garden. Michael didn't head for the terrace furniture. Instead, he walked directly to the grass near the pond and sat down cross-legged. Noah immediately joined him. Emma, after a moment's hesitation, followed. She sat between them, her yellow dress pooling around her. Eleanor remained standing, unable to relax. For 20 minutes, Michael did nothing that resembled therapy. He pointed at birds. He and Noah skipped stones. He asked Emma if she could hear the wind. He didn't ask her to speak. He simply existed beside her, creating a space where sound was welcome but not required. Then Noah pulled a small music box from his pocket. Shaped like a carousel. He wound it up. Delicate notes filled the air. Emma's eyes lit up. Noah placed it in her hands. Michael leaned closer. "Sound isn't just something you hear with your ears, Emma. It's something you feel in your heart. Your mom's heart makes sounds too. Sad ones, because she misses hearing you. But she's listening. Always listening." Emma's small fingers traced the carousel's painted horses. Her lips moved. Then, quietly, she hummed along with the music box. Eleanor's hand flew to her chest. That tiny hum was the most beautiful thing she'd heard in 3 years. She sank onto the terrace steps, tears streaming down her face. The arrangement became routine. Twice a week, Michael and Noah arrived at the Anderson estate. No payment exchanged hands. "This isn't about money, Mrs. Anderson. It's about Emma finding her way back." Eleanor watched these sessions from inside the house. Michael never pushed Emma to speak. Some days she remained entirely silent. Other days she hummed or made small sounds. Progress measured in breaths and glances rather than words. But there was change. Emma smiled more. Her movements became less cautious. She began initiating contact with Noah, pulling him toward flowers or butterflies she wanted him to see. One afternoon, Michael found Eleanor in the library. He knocked softly. "Can I ask you something?" Eleanor looked up. "Of course." Michael entered slowly. "When did you stop talking to Emma?" The question hit like a physical blow. "I talk to her every day." Michael shook his head gently. "You talk at her. Instructions, concerns, plans. But when did you last have a conversation? When did you ask her something and wait for an answer, even if the answer is silence?" Eleanor felt defensive walls rising. "She can't answer. She doesn't speak. She communicates constantly." Michael countered quietly. "Through her eyes. Her posture. The way she moves toward things she likes. And away from things that scare her. But you're so focused on hearing words that you're missing everything she's saying." Eleanor's throat tightened. She set down her book with trembling hands. "I don't know how to do what you do." Michael pulled a chair closer and sat across from her. "I'm not doing anything special. I'm just remembering that listening isn't passive. It's active. It's paying attention to all the ways someone tries to communicate. Not just the way we want them to." Eleanor met his eyes, and something shifted between them. This man who collected garbage understood things she'd never learned, despite her education and success. "Teach me," she whispered. Michael smiled. "You're already learning. You're here, Asking the question. That's the first step. Over the following weeks, Eleanor began to change. She spent less time in her office, more time in the garden. She learned to read her daughter's body language. She discovered that Emma loved the sound of water and hated the buzz of the lawnmower. Small things. But they added up to understanding. And slowly, Emma began opening up. Not with words yet, but with gestures, with eye contact, with small sounds that weren't quite words, but weren't silence either. Michael watched mother and daughter rebuild their connection and felt something expand in his chest. The breakthrough came 3 weeks into Michael's visits. On an unseasonably warm spring afternoon, Emma had been playing in the garden with Noah, their laughter carrying through open windows. Eleanor had been working in her study, but finding her attention constantly drifting to the sounds outside. Michael sat on the terrace steps. Eleanor joined him, settling onto the stone step with less stiffness than she would have a month ago. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Emma and Noah chase butterflies through the flower beds. Then Noah tripped over an exposed root and fell hard. He cried out. More surprised than hurt, Emma's face crumpled in concern. She ran to him, knelt beside him, and placed her small hand on his arm. Her mouth opened, and words came out. Are you okay? 3 words. Clear as bells. Unmistakable. Noah looked up, startled. Michael went completely still. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to cover her mouth. Emma seemed shocked by her own voice. Her eyes widened in fear. But then Noah broke into a huge grin. Yeah, I'm okay. You talked. Emma's fear transformed into cautious joy. She looked toward the terrace where her mother and Michael sat frozen. Michael found his voice first. That was very kind, Emma. Noah's lucky to have a friend who cares. But it was Eleanor who Emma was watching. Eleanor, whose face had gone pale, whose eyes brimmed with tears. Slowly, Eleanor stood. She walked across the terrace and down the steps into the garden. She knelt in the grass and opened her arms. Emma came to her, uncertain but trusting. Eleanor wrapped her daughter in her arms and whispered against her hair, I'm listening, baby. I'm always listening. Emma pulled back just enough to see her mother's face. Her voice came again, stronger this time. Mommy? The word Eleanor had despaired of ever hearing again. Eleanor broke. She wept openly, holding her daughter close, rocking them both in the afternoon sunlight. Michael quietly gathered Noah and led him back toward the house, giving them privacy. But before he disappeared inside, Eleanor called out. Michael. He turned. Eleanor's face, tear-streaked and transformed by joy, looked younger than he'd ever seen it. Thank you. Michael shook his head gently. That was all, Emma. And you. I just reminded you both that connection is possible. That night, Eleanor sat with Emma in her daughter's bedroom. Emma curled against her mother's side. Eleanor stroked her daughter's hair and asked softly, Why did you start talking again? Emma was quiet for so long. Eleanor thought she might have fallen asleep. Then her small voice emerged. Because I wasn't scared anymore. Michael showed me that sounds can be safe. Eleanor's throat tightened. 3 years of expensive treatments. And what Emma had needed was simply to feel safe. Michael should have known that something this good couldn't remain private. Within a week, someone had taken a photograph of Michael's car in Eleanor's driveway and posted it to a neighborhood forum. Anderson's daughter speaking again thanks to Garbage Man ? From there, the story exploded. Local news picked it up first. Billionaire CEO hires sanitation worker to treat daughter's mutism. Then regional outlets ran with increasingly sensationalized versions. Social media amplified everything, turning private healing into public entertainment. Eleanor's office received hundreds of calls. Her inbox flooded with interview requests, book deals, people demanding to know Michael's secret method. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. Eleanor's assistant forwarded her dozens of memes. Some celebrated the story. Others mocked her for trusting a garbage man over qualified professionals. The attention horrified Michael. He stopped coming to the estate, afraid his presence would make things worse. Eleanor texted him repeatedly. "Please don't disappear. Emma keeps asking for you." But Michael, who'd already lost everything once to public judgment, couldn't risk it again. He had Noah to protect. Then came the Spring Charity Gala, an annual event Eleanor hosted for children's hospitals. 500 guests in designer gowns and expensive suits gathered in the Anderson Estate's grand ballroom. Eleanor had considered canceling, but her publicist insisted it would look like she had something to hide. The event proceeded as planned. Orchestral music, passed champagne, silent auction items. Eleanor moved through the crowd with practiced grace, deflecting questions about Emma with polite non-answers. Emma herself was upstairs with a babysitter. Midway through the evening, the sound system failed. Feedback screeched through speakers. The orchestra stopped playing. The technician, flustered, couldn't identify the problem. The room filled with uncomfortable silence and whispered conversations. Then a voice spoke from near the service entrance. "It's the crossover frequency." Someone adjusted the equalizer settings. Michael emerged from the shadows near the catering station. He'd been hired, anonymously, as part of the event cleanup crew. He wore a simple black uniform, functionally invisible among the glittering crowd. But now, with 500 pairs of eyes turning toward him, he became very visible. Eleanor's heart stopped. Michael walked to the sound booth with calm confidence. He adjusted 3 settings, replaced a faulty connection, and within 30 seconds, clear music filled the ballroom. He turned to leave, but Eleanor's voice stopped him. "Wait." She moved through the crowd, which parted for her automatically. She reached Michael's side and turned to face her guests. "This man saved my daughter's life. Not with medicine or therapy or expensive treatments. He saved her by remembering that sometimes the most important sound is silence, and the most important skill is listening." The room went completely quiet. Before Michael could protest, another voice rang out. "That's my friend." Emma stood at the top of the grand staircase in her pajamas, having escaped the babysitter. Her small voice carried through the silent ballroom. "That's my friend, and he's the best person I know." Noah appeared behind her. "That's my dad." The crowd erupted, not with mockery, but with genuine emotion. Several people began to applaud. Others wiped tears from their eyes. Michael, overwhelmed, simply shook his head and smiled. Sometimes the world gets too loud. That's when people stop hearing each other. Then he slipped away before anyone could stop him. By morning, the story had evolved. Michael Grant wasn't just a garbage man. He was Dr. Grant, former Columbia professor, who'd walked away from everything to raise his son. The media attention brought consequences Eleanor hadn't anticipated. Within 3 days of the gala, Anderson Global Solutions Board of Directors convened an emergency meeting. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, facing 12 men and women who controlled her company's future. Richard Thornton, the board chairman, spoke first. His voice carried cold precision. "Eleanor, we need to discuss your judgment. This situation with the sanitation worker has become a liability." Eleanor's spine stiffened. "His name is Michael Grant, and he helped Emma speak again after 3 years of silence. I'd hardly call that a liability." Margaret Chen, the chief financial officer, leaned forward. "We understand you're grateful, but the optics are problematic. We're negotiating a merger with Jameson Healthcare. They're traditional, conservative. They've expressed concerns about leadership stability." "Leadership stability?" Eleanor's voice turned ice cold. "My company's revenue increased 22% last year. What exactly about my leadership is unstable?" Richard's expression hardened. "You trusted your daughter's care to a man without credentials, without vetting, based on nothing but intuition. That's not the Eleanor Anderson who built this company. That's someone making emotional rather than strategic decisions." The words landed like physical blows. "He has credentials. He's Dr. Michael Grant, former Columbia faculty, specialist in child psychology." "Had credentials," Margaret corrected gently. "He resigned under unclear circumstances 9 years ago. Whatever he was, he isn't that anymore." Richard played his final card. The Jameson merger represents $2 billion in value and expansion into 6 new markets. They've made it clear they want leadership they can trust. Leadership that makes decisions based on data, not sentiment. He paused. Cut ties with Dr. Grant. Publicly. Issue a statement thanking him, but making clear you're pursuing proper medical treatment for Emma. Do this. And Jameson stays at the table. Eleanor's mind raced. $2 billion. 6 new markets. 5,000 employees whose jobs depended on the company's growth. Against that, one man who'd asked for nothing and given everything. And if I refuse? Richard's expression held no sympathy. Then we vote. And I believe you'll find the board unanimous in its concern about your current decision-making capacity. The threat was clear. They could remove her as chief executive officer. Eleanor had built this company from the ground up. But she didn't own controlling interest. The board had power, and they were willing to use it. She left the meeting without answering. Eleanor sat in her parked car outside Michael's modest house for 20 minutes before finding the courage to approach his door. The neighborhood hummed with ordinary evening life. Children rode bikes. Someone grilled dinner. Laughter spilled from open windows. It was so different from her silent mansion. When Michael opened the door, his face showed surprise, but no anger. He'd been expecting this conversation. "I'm sorry," Eleanor began, her voice breaking. "The board. They want me to." The merger as Michael held up his hand gently. "I know." "You know?" "Eleanor, I've been through this before. When power and authenticity conflict, power usually wins. It's not your fault." His kindness made everything worse. Eleanor wanted him to be angry. Instead, he stepped aside and gestured for her to come in. The house smelled like spaghetti sauce and old books. Noah sat at the kitchen table, doing homework. He looked up when Eleanor entered and waved cheerfully before returning to his math problems. Michael led Eleanor to a small living room crammed with mismatched furniture and overflowing bookshelves. "The board wants me to cut ties with you," Eleanor said bluntly. "Issue a statement. Distance myself professionally." Michael nodded slowly. "What do you want to do?" The question surprised her. "It doesn't matter what I want. The merger is worth $2 billion. My employees' futures depend on it. I have responsibilities. You have a daughter," Michael countered quietly. "One who just learned to trust again. What happens to her when you choose money over the person who helped her find her voice?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "That's not fair. This isn't about choosing money. It's about protecting everything I've built, everyone who depends on me." Michael leaned forward. "Let me ask you something. When you die, when you're looking back on your life, what do you think will matter more? That merger, or the moment Emma said your name?" The question pierced through Eleanor's carefully constructed rationalizations. She thought about Emma's small voice saying "Mommy." She thought about the 3 years of silence before that. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. Michael stood and walked to a bookshelf. He pulled out a small leather journal and handed it to Eleanor. "I wrote this 9 years ago, right after I left Columbia. Right after everyone told me keeping Noah would ruin my life." Eleanor opened the journal. The first page contained a single sentence. "The only reputation that matters is the one you can live with." She read it twice, then closed the journal carefully. "The board will remove me if I don't comply." "Maybe," Michael acknowledged. "Or maybe standing up for what's right is exactly what strong leadership looks like." Michael seemed to read her thoughts. "I'm going to tell you something I learned. When you sacrifice what matters for what works, you lose both. The merger might happen without you. The company might survive. But Emma? She needs you to choose her. Not just with words, but with actions." Eleanor stood, her body feeling heavy. She handed the journal back. "They'll destroy you in the press if I don't distance myself. They'll dig up your past, paint you as an opportunist." Michael smiled sadly. "I've been destroyed before. I rebuilt. What about you, Eleanor? If you bend on this, can you rebuild what it'll cost you?" She didn't answer. She left his house without another word. That night, Eleanor sat in Emma's bedroom, watching her daughter sleep. Emma's face looked so young, so trusting. Eleanor thought about the 3 years of silence, the 18 specialists who'd failed. The moment Michael had succeeded by simply being present. By dawn, Eleanor had made her choice. Eleanor never sent the statement the board demanded, because 2 nights after her visit to Michael's house, the decision was taken out of her hands in the most terrifying way possible. A spring storm rolled in after midnight. Lightning cracked across the sky. Thunder rattled windows. Rain fell in sheets. Eleanor sat in her study working, unable to sleep. Emma slept upstairs, exhausted from asking about Michael and Noah. The first flash came at 1:17 in the morning. Lightning struck the estate's greenhouse. The strike hit the electrical panel. Sparks ignited insulation. Within seconds, flames raced along wiring hidden in the walls. The fire spread faster than seemed possible. By the time Eleanor smelled smoke, flames had reached the main house through a covered walkway. She grabbed her phone and ran for the stairs. Emma! Her daughter's bedroom was on the 2nd floor, at the far end of the east wing. Eleanor pounded up the stairs, calling Emma's name. Smoke filled the upper hallway, thick and acrid. She could barely see. The fire alarm screamed. Sprinklers activated, soaking everything but doing nothing to slow the flames. Eleanor reached Emma's door and found it locked from the inside. Emma had developed a fear of nighttime intruders after James died. Eleanor usually kept a key, but in her panic, she'd left it downstairs. She pounded on the door. Emma, baby, open the door. No response. Eleanor threw her shoulder against the door. Once, twice. The wood held. Smoke grew thicker. Heat pressed against her back. Emma! Desperation made her voice raw. Please. Miles away. Michael's phone rang. He fumbled for it, groggy. Hello? Eleanor's voice came through, broken and terrified. Fire. Emma's trapped. 2nd floor. Can't. The line cut out. Michael was already moving. He grabbed his keys and ran for the truck. Noah appeared at the bedroom door. Stay with Mrs. Chen next door, Michael shouted. He drove faster than he ever had, running 2 red lights. The normally 15-minute drive took 7 minutes. He could see the glow against the sky from 2 miles away. When he arrived, fire trucks were just pulling up. The greenhouse blazed. Flames licked up the side of the main house. Firefighters shouted orders, unrolling hoses. Michael didn't think. He ran toward the house. A firefighter grabbed his arm. Sir, you can't. There's a child on the 2nd floor. Michael wrenched free and kept running. He knew the layout. East wing. 2nd floor. Hallway bathroom had a balcony overlooking the garden. He circled the house while firefighters focused on the main blaze. The balcony was accessible if he could reach the trellis. Michael climbed. The wood groaned under his weight. He hauled himself over the railing and smashed through the bathroom window with his elbow. Glass shattered. Smoke poured out. He wrapped his shirt around his face and pushed into the hallway. The heat was staggering. Visibility near zero. He dropped to his hands and knees where the air was slightly clearer. Emma. His voice came out harsh from smoke. Emma, it's Michael. He crawled forward, feeling along the wall. His hand found a door. He tried the handle. Locked. Michael stood, braced himself, and kicked the door twice. The frame splintered. The door burst inward. Emma huddled in the corner of her room, hands over her ears, eyes squeezed shut. She was coughing but alive. Michael crossed the room in 3 steps, scooped her up, and wrapped his soaking wet shirt around her face. I've got you, princess. Hold on tight. He carried her back through the smoke-filled hallway. The fire had reached the main stairs. They couldn't go that way. Michael went back to the bathroom, out onto the balcony. Below, firefighters spotted them. Jump. We've got a net. Michael looked down. The net looked impossibly small. Emma trembled against his chest. He leaned close to her ear. "Do you trust me?" Emma nodded against his shoulder. "Then close your eyes and hold on. Don't let go." Michael climbed onto the railing, holding Emma with one arm. For a moment, he balanced there, the fire roaring behind them. Then he jumped. They fell together. Michael twisted mid-fall, ensuring his body would hit first. They struck the net, bounced once, and firefighters pulled them to safety. Eleanor materialized out of the chaos. Her face was streaked with ash and tears. She reached for Emma, who transferred from Michael's arms to her mother's. Mother and daughter collapsed together on the wet grass, both sobbing. Emma pulled back from her mother just enough to speak. Her voice, small but clear, carried through the chaos. "I trust him, Mommy." 4 words. But they changed everything. The fire made headlines. But the story wasn't about property damage. It was about a man who'd risked his life without hesitation. About a mother who'd almost lost everything. About a little girl whose trust had been earned through gentleness. The board's emergency meeting 3 days later had a very different tone. Richard Thornton sat quietly throughout Eleanor's statement. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "The Jameson merger no longer seems as important as it did last week," he admitted. "I believe we were wrong to pressure you." Margaret Chen spoke next, her voice softer than Eleanor had ever heard it. "My daughter saw the news coverage. She asked me if I would run into a burning building for her. I realized I didn't know the answer." Eleanor didn't gloat. She simply said, "I want to establish a foundation, Emma's Fund. Research grants for alternative approaches to childhood trauma. No more choosing money over people." The vote was unanimous. Michael visited the hospital where Emma and Eleanor were being monitored for smoke inhalation. He found them in a shared room, Emma curled against her mother's side on the narrow bed. Eleanor looked up when he entered. "They told me you climbed a trellis and jumped from a second-floor balcony." Michael shrugged. "Seemed like the thing to do." Eleanor laughed, then winced. "I read your research papers. From Columbia. I found them in the university archives." Michael went still. "You didn't have to. I wanted to understand why someone so brilliant would walk away from everything." She paused. "Your papers talked about authenticity in therapeutic relationships, about how healing requires presence, not just expertise." Michael sat in the chair beside the bed. "I didn't feel very authentic back then. I was performing brilliance. After Noah came, I had to learn how to actually be present." Emma stirred, her eyes opening. She looked at Michael and smiled. "Hi." Just that, one word. But it contained trust and affection that no longer words could express. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry. For doubting you. For almost choosing the merger." Michael stopped her with a gentle shake of his head. "You chose right when it mattered. That's what counts." Emma sat up slightly. "Are you and Noah coming over when we go home?" Michael looked at Eleanor, uncertain. Eleanor reached across the bed and took his hand. Her grip was firm, decisive. "I hope you'll come over often. If you're willing." Michael squeezed her hand gently. "We'd like that." And just like that, the walls between their worlds crumbled. Simply 2 people, scarred by their pasts, choosing to trust each other anyway. 1 year later, spring returned to New York. The Anderson estate, rebuilt and redesigned, looked different now. Less imposing, more welcoming. The front gates stood open more often than closed. The gardens now contained a vegetable patch where Emma and Noah grew tomatoes that never quite ripened properly but tasted wonderful anyway. Michael stood on the lawn behind a new building, smaller and more modest than the mansion but purposeful in its design. The sign above the entrance read, "Spring Mind Center." Today was opening day. 40 people milled around the grounds. Parents with quiet children. Educators. A few journalists. Michael spotted Noah helping Emma arrange chairs near the entrance. His son caught his eye and grinned. At 13 now, Noah had grown taller and more confident. Eleanor emerged from the building, carrying pamphlets describing the center's approach. She wore jeans and a simple blue sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked nothing like the chief executive officer who'd first confronted Michael 18 months ago. She looked happy. She spotted Michael and crossed the lawn to join him, slipping her hand into his. "Ready?" she asked. Michael looked at the building they'd designed together, a place where children who couldn't speak would learn they were heard anyway. "I think so," he said. "You?" Eleanor smiled. "I stopped trying to be ready for everything. I'm just trying to be present." Emma and Noah finished arranging the chairs and ran over. Emma, now 8 years old, had become remarkably talkative. "Are you going to make a speech?" Emma asked her mother. "A short one," Eleanor promised. "You and Noah are the real stars today." Noah made a face. "We're just kids who know stuff." Michael laughed and ruffled his son's hair. "That's exactly what makes you perfect for this." The small crowd began to settle into chairs. Eleanor took her place at the microphone with Emma and Noah flanking her. Michael stayed back. Eleanor's voice, amplified but still soft, carried across the lawn. "A year ago, I thought I'd lost everything. My home burned. My daughter couldn't speak. I'd built walls so high I'd forgotten what connection felt like. Then someone reminded me that the best sound isn't words. It's understanding. Today, we're opening this center to help other families remember that too." Emma stepped forward. Her voice, still small but clear, read from a card she'd prepared. "Not every sound has to be loud. Some sounds are love. Some sounds are forgiveness. And some sounds are springtime." The audience applauded. Michael watched Eleanor's face, saw the pride and peace there, and felt something in his chest expand. He'd thought his life was over 9 years ago, but standing here, watching the family he'd found in the ruins of his old life, Michael understood that sometimes falling apart is the only way to become whole. After the ceremony, Michael found himself alone with Eleanor near the rebuilt greenhouse. The new structure was smaller, filled with herbs and wildflowers. Through the glass, spring sunlight created patterns. Eleanor leaned against him. "Thank you," she said eventually, "for not giving up on us." Michael shook his head. "You saved yourselves. I just showed up. Sometimes showing up is everything." She turned to face him. "I read something recently about how the word healing comes from the same root as whole. We weren't broken, we were just incomplete." Michael smiled. "Where'd you read that?" "Your dissertation. I might have requested a copy." Michael pulled her closer. "And? What did you learn?" Eleanor laughed softly. "That you've been consistent. The man you are now is the same man who wrote those papers. You just needed the right family to show you." They stood together as afternoon sun warmed the garden. Emma's laughter rang out from inside the center. The sound carried through open windows, bright and unrestrained. Michael thought about the morning 18 months ago, when he'd dropped his keychain. Such a small moment. But it had changed everything. Sometimes the most important sounds weren't words at all. Sometimes they were the crack of ice breaking, the rush of walls falling, the quiet breath of someone learning to trust again. Spring arrived every year. But this year, finally, Michael understood what renewal actually meant.